can't see any of you out there, but welcome everyone who's tuned in or tuning in. If you've tuned in late, that's okay. Or if you can't tune in at all, that's okay too, because we're going to archive this in the Zogen Editions webpage. Today, I'm broadcasting to you from my home in Ashfield, Massachusetts. And the reason for this, as you know, is that today marks the release date of the Self-Arisen Vidya and Self-Liberated Vidya Tantras, published by Wisdom Publications. And before I begin describing those two books, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank, first of all, my gurus, notably Chogyal Namkhai Norbu, the late Kunzang Dechen Lingpa, the late Taklung Sechen Rinpoche, and the late Khenpo Jigme Punsok Rinpoche, who are the principal teachers from whom I received Dzogchen teachings from, as well as many other teachers, too numerous to mention. Beyond that, I would like to mention our family at Wisdom Publications, namely Daniel Aiken, whose vision and confidence in us allowed us to publish our translations of these texts, to Laura Cunningham, who has, with unfailing humor, guided us through the process of the editing and publication of these books, and to the rest of the Wisdom team, who have just been fantastic in terms of how much support they've given us. Of course, then I need to mention my two editors, Osa Manel and Michael Tweed, who have stuck with me through thick and thin and put up with lots of nonsense from me in terms of editing these books. Not only that, I'd like to thank Tulku Dakpa Rinpoche, Jean-Luc Achard, Eric Pema Kunsang, Sangye Khandro for giving us support. In particular, I want to say that Sangye Khandro and her partner Lama Chonam have been particularly supportive of our efforts to get these tantras out to qualified readers of them. I also want to thank Tashi Mannix for his beautiful calligraphies, which grace the interior of these two volumes, as well as Origin Gyalpo, who illustrated the image of the Bhagawan Pawashono Tubden, according to the way he's described in the Great Chronicle in the Vima Nintig. As I also wanted to thank Gopa Campbell for her role, as always, in her design of the cover and for her setting out the initial interior design of our books in general. And there's lots of other people I could thank, but then it would take up the entire hour that I intend to talk, so I think I'll leave it right there. So we at Zogen Editions thank all of you, and we also thank you, the reading public, for having an interest in these books. So to begin with, the Rigpa Ramchar is the longest of the 17 Dzogchen Tantras. But before we begin to discuss what the Rigpa Ramchar is and what the Rigpa Rangdrol are, what these two texts are, first we should understand a little bit what the 17 Tantras are, why this group of texts is important, to whom they're important, and a little bit of the history of their revelation. So I'm not going to indulge in sort of a Western text critical point of view about these. This is well known. You can read these in various academic works if you're so inclined. But the traditional account of the 17 Tantras is that, and this account is given again in the Vima Nintig principally. The Vima Nintig really forms the, in particular the Logyu Chenmo, the sort of Great Chronicle, forms the historical narrative that has really determined how Dzogchen teachings are understood today in terms of their division into the 3 series and the 4 cycles and so on and so forth. So traditionally speaking, there was a Nirmanakaya who lived in the region of Udayana, the same place where Padmasambhava comes from. And this is considered to be somewhere in Pakistan, just as Shambhala is considered to have been historically located next door in Afghanistan. And so in this kingdom of Udayana, there was a young man, a young boy really, whose name has come down to us as Garab Dorje, or Vajrahe, or Vajraprahe, depending upon how you see sort of different Sanskrit versions of this. In any case, Garab Dorje is held to be a pure Nirmanakaya, meaning that he was, like Shakyamuni Buddha, an actual emanation of Buddha Vajradhara in human realms. And so, as an emanation, he had access to all of the Dzogchen teachings that had been taught by the previous 12 Dzogchen Buddhas, beginning with the first Buddha Nirmanakaya who taught Dzogchen teachings in the very first eon, known as Nangma Dampa. And then there were sort of 6 teachers who taught only in the Deva Lokas, and then there were 6 teachers who taught in the human realms. The final one of those would be Buddha Shakyamuni, who, although the last Shakyamuni never explicitly taught Dzogchen teachings in this dimension, he predicted the arrival of Garab Dorje, and so for this reason we consider that Shakyamuni Buddha is one of the 12 Buddhas who taught or were responsible for teaching Dzogchen teachings since the beginning of this Mahakalpa, which is 64 eons long. So in any case, Garab Dorje, it's completely unclear when Garab Dorje actually lived, but Chogyal Namkhai Norbu has placed him approximately 55 AD, about 500 years after the Buddha's parinirvana. 400 or 500 years, depending upon how you count the Buddha's parinirvana. So in any event, there's 2 lineages of teachers within the Dzogchen tradition. There's the lineage of teachers which are associated with the text known as Semde, or the Mind series. And that lineage of teachers is about 21 teachers between Garab Dorje and Vairochana, who was the first Tibetan to introduce Dzogchen teachings into Tibet. Then there's a shorter lineage. Now in the longer lineage, there's 2 Manjushri Mitras. There's an earlier Manjushri Mitra who is the direct disciple of Garab Dorje, and then there's a later Manjushri Mitra who is held to be the reincarnation of the first Manjushri Mitra. In any event, in the Menakde lineage, there's many fewer masters, and the lineage goes from Garab Dorje to Manjushri Mitra. Manjushri Mitra then teaches Shri Singha, who is the teacher of Vairochana, but not only this, Shri Singha was the teacher of another master named Jnana Sutra, as well as Vimala Mitra. And so the person who brought the 17 Tantras and their ancillary literature to Tibet is held to be the master Vimala Mitra. And Vimala Mitra probably arrived in Tibet sometime in the last decade of the 8th century and the first decade of the 9th century. It's a little unclear. Precisely just because we don't have good historical records from the Imperial Tibetan period. Nevertheless, we know fairly certainly he arrived within this 20-year time frame. Then it's held that Vimala Mitra, after translating this text with Kawa Palsek mainly, bestowed them on only a very few of his students, and in particular gave them to a master named Nyangben Tenzin Zangpo, who was Nyangben means the monk from the Nyang clan, and his name was Tenzin Sangpo, something like Samadhi Bhadra. Anyway, Tenzin Zangpo, he then concealed these texts in a temple about 30 kilometers north of Lhasa called the Shwa Temple, where they remained hidden for another, well, it depends. We don't really know how long Yamben lived and so on and so forth, but they remained concealed in this temple until the time of a person named Dangma Lungyel. And Dangma Lungyel was someone who had received the oral transmission of the Menakde series, but not the textual tradition. And so the textual tradition was revealed by Dangma Lungyel probably 15 years or so before Atisha passed away. We know that Atisha passed away in 1052. And we know, according to the traditional accounts, that there was 30 years between the time that Dangma Lungyel revealed these teachings initially and gave them to a 15-year-old young man named Chetsen Senge Wangchuk. So in that period of time, we know for sure that Chetsen Senge Wangchuk received the 17 Tantras and their ancillary literature after the passing of Atisha. This is very clearly stated in the Vima Nintig literature. In any event, now amongst these 17 Tantras, there are, not all of them are considered to be sort of absolutely crucial, and this one master who lives in the 12th century named Kepa Nibum, he identifies 7 of these tantras as being the most critical. It may surprise you to learn that the Rigpa Rangshar is not identified as one of the 7 critical 17 tantras. Nevertheless, the Rigpa Rangshar Tantra is considered to be the main commentary tantra on the 17 tantras in general, and specifically the Rigpa Rangshar. Now, the reason why it's considered to be a commentary tantra is because when we're talking about the 17 tantras, there's a couple of different ways to divide up which are the most important tantras and which are, which are of less importance, or which are primary and which are secondary. So when we're considering the 17 tantras from the point of view of which of these tantras was taught first, then the first Dzogchen Tantra that was taught in this Mahakalpa was the Drataljur, and the rest of the 17 Tantras were taught after that. And so for this reason, the Drataljur, or the Sound Tantra, is considered to be the root Tantra of Dzogchen. From the point of view of content, then the Yige Mepa, the Tantra without syllables, and the Dzogpa Rangjung, respectively, are considered to be the root tantras of Dzogchen, because the Yige Mepa teaches the fundamental view of Dzogchen, and the Dzogpa Rangjung teaches the method of granting empowerments into Dzogchen teachings. So for this reason, we then would consider these 2 tantras to be the root tantras of Dzogchen. Where the Rigpa Rangshar, however, is encyclopedic. It is as I mentioned before, it is the largest of the 17 tantras, and it consists of 86 chapters. And its companion tantra, the Self-Liberated Vidya Tantra, the Rigpa Rangdrol, only has 6 chapters, 7 chapters, I'm sorry. And it consists principally of methods of understanding the 17 Dzogchen Tantras in general, and principally it contains a detailed analysis of or an outline really, of the chapters of the Self-Arisen Vidya Tantra. Now, some people may find my use of the term Vidya to be a little strange. Some explanation about that can be found in our first book, Buddhahood in This Life, where I explain fairly clearly that the term Rigpa is a very hard term to translate into English, and if one was going to translate it literally, one would have to translate it as knowledge. There is very firm evidence for this in the commentary of the Yige Mepa, but I don't want to get too distracted with that. In any event, here, when we're talking about the term vidya, we're really principally talking about knowledge of our own state, actually. And so that is the subject matter of the Rigpa Rangshar. So when we consider the Rigpa Rangshar itself, the Rigpa Rangshar is divided up into 4 sections by the Self-Liberated Vidya Tantra. It consists of the section on words and meanings. That goes up through chapter 26. Then from chapter 27 through chapter 44, 45, it goes into the foundation chapter. And then the remaining 2 sections are sections of what they call collected topics, miscellaneous topics. And there's 2 sections of that. Now, the first part of the Rigpa Rangshar Tantra, as the section name indicates, is really concerned with identifying what it begins with an analysis of conduct, then meditation, then view, then it goes into a discussion of the 3 kayas, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, the Nirmanakaya, and then the 3 kayas as an inseparable entity. It then discusses the 5 wisdoms, the breakdown of the 5 wisdoms into 25 wisdoms. It discusses the kayas as the Buddha families. It discusses the 5 lights. It discusses the 5 elements. In short, it gives a synopsis of all of the major topics of that Dzogchen practitioners have to understand. This is why it's called the section on words and meanings, or categories. That's what Sikdun. Sikdun is a translation of a Sanskrit term called padarth. And padarth can be translated as, sentences or words and meanings, but typically in Sanskrit it's just understood as meaning category. So the first section of the Rigpa Rangshar deals with the categories that we use and we find in Dzogchen teachings. The second section of the Rigpa Rangshar is called the foundation, principally because the Rigpa Rangshar, here in this section, the Rigpa Rangshar is very much concerned with identifying what is the origin of delusion. This section of the Rangshar is very interesting. It has a pronounced emphasis on 5 chapters of allegories. Some of these allegories seem very truncated and strange. They're very hard to understand. Fortunately, in the Derge edition of the Rigpa Rangshar, this section is very heavily annotated. Other scholars before myself have also addressed these particular chapters, notably Matthew Kapstein, Chogyal Namkhai Norbu, Herbert Gunther, and so on and so forth. And these chapters also exist in other Terma traditions. Also exist in other Terma traditions, such as the Gongpa Zongtel, where they exist as separate tantras. So that's also very helpful, was helpful in my translating this section, because these allegories, as you will read, are very strange, but they're very interesting. But their principal purpose actually is to explain in allegorical fashion how delusion happens and how liberation can be achieved on the basis of understanding how delusion occurs. Then the next 2 sections, as I mentioned, are miscellaneous sections. They don't seem to have a systematic theme, but while some people may be tempted to think that they were just added onto, given the time frame of the time frame of the revelation of these texts. I don't think so. My personal opinion is the Rik Barangshar was all set down at one time. Then there are some notably amazing chapters, particularly in the final section of the Rik Barangshar, which has a beautiful soliloquy to Manjushri and what the meaning of Manjushri is. The principal interlocutor of the petitioner, rather, of the Tantra is Vajrapani. And of course, the reader will observe that in the Rikpa Rangdrol, the principal petitioner of the Tantra is Manjushri. And the reason for this is, as far as I can tell, is that the Rik Barangshar is dealing very much directly with the sort of secret mantra aspects of Dzogchen teachings, whereas the Rikpa Rangdrol is dealing with interpretive aspects. How do we understand these tantras? How do we unravel these tantras? The term Rik Barangdrol, actually, there's a bit of a pun or play on words in this, because the entire title of the tantra means, the word drolwa can, if you have one particle in front of it, means to unravel. If you are missing that particle, it means to liberate. So the Rik Barangdrol Tantra is actually the Tantra which helps one unravel the meaning specifically of the Rik Barangshar, but generally of all Dzogchen Tantras in general. So a reader might be wondering what they're going to get out of studying this text. And in order to aid that, I've written an introduction which gives not a detailed summary or synopsis of every chapter, but in the introduction I've not only do I address some of the historical considerations regarding the 17 Tantras from a more traditional point of view, but I've also endeavored to synopsize the themes that seemed important to me in each individual chapter. Now, there are some chapters where it seemed to me that the theme was pretty obvious and evident, or the chapter's material itself is repetitive. That said, there's a lot of repetition in these texts in general, and for a number of reasons. Most prominent among them is that Dzogchen teachings are hard to remember, and so therefore, and Buddhist teachings in general are hard to remember, and so therefore there's an incredible amount of repetition in the whole of the 17 Tantras, but also in the Rik Barangshar itself. You can pretty much open up the book in many places and then randomly open it to another place, and it will seem like there's a total continuity between these two distinct passages that you're reading. So the Rik Barangshar does speak in one continuous voice, which is important to understand. So that as the reader is reading it, except for when the voice, there is a section in the text where the voice shifts to a number of dakinis who begin asking the Buddha in this tantra, sort of asking him questions. So the text begins with Vajrapani being the main subject, being the main petitioner, as I mentioned. But there's a section in the middle where it switches to these dakinis who then come to the Buddha and start asking him these questions. And then the sort of narrator, I guess you could say, of the Tantra being Vajrapani, it switches back to him, and he concludes the text. So anyway, we have the text right here. This is our examination copy. As I said, the on the cover, which is also here, we commissioned Tashi Mannix to do that, and he did a beautiful job. As I mentioned before, Well, it's a hardcover edition. There isn't yet a an electronic edition, unfortunately, but there will be eventually. But you have to buy enough hardcover copies to make it worth wisdom's while to, make an electronic copy. They're not going to issue an electronic copy until you guys have bought some hardcovers. Okay, so just understand that. So you people who only want an electronic edition, you have to encourage your friends to buy the hardcover, because otherwise you're not going to get the electronic edition. But anyway, I strongly feel, honestly, I have to be perfectly frank with you. Holding this book in your hand is much nicer than looking at it on an iPad, where you're going to have you're going to have all of your stocks and your financial information and pornography and these kinds of things. So don't, honestly, having putting your book on, having an iPad Dharma books is kind of it's a little questionable. You never know what bits are going to get mixed up with other bits on the hard drive. So, you're going to have all kinds of bits mixed up. So in any case, with that plug, please buy the book. The book itself is beautifully printed by Wisdom. Also I should mention my brother. He took the author photo, Eric Smith. And then there's as I said, there's a nice introduction by Tulku Dakpa, nice foreword. And there's also a very nice introduction by Jean-Luc Achard, who also contextualizes the text as well. Then in the introduction, quite frankly, I relied on the Vimanintig's presentation. There's a text in the Vimanintig which goes through the meaning of the titles of the 17 Tantras, so that's my explanation in here is largely based on that in the introduction, and then I move into the sort of the chapters. Now, the text itself, it begins in a very standard way with thus I explained at one time, thus have I heard at one time, just like a normal Dharma text, since this is considered to be, this is the word of the Buddha. Technically, it should be part of the Kenjur, but because of biases that certain Tibetan editors had, they excluded these texts from the Kenjur, but it's not a correct thing. These things should be included in the Kenjur, in my opinion. I had thought maybe I would do some reading from the Rik Barangshar. The problem is that there's so much here to read, it's very hard to pick anything as being better than, or sort of, what the best thing to pick would be. It's kind of impossible. But there is one chapter in here that I did find, which I thought might be suitable. Yep. Okay. So this is from chapter 50, and it is called The Basis, Path, and Result. So the Buddha here, addressed as Bhagavan Vajradhara in this text, is asked by Vajrapani to please teach on the basis and path of the great perfection. So the Buddha replies, he says, in the great perfection Atta Yoga, there is no basis, path, and result. Actually, it says, there is no basis, path, and result. Nevertheless, a basis, path, and result are taught. The basis is said to have two aspects, the basis of a great original purity and the basis of diverse natural perfection. Also, in the basis of great original purity, pristine consciousness, that is yeshe, translated by other translators as timeless awareness and wisdom and so on, primordial wisdom and so on and so forth. Pristine consciousness is clear without impediment. Since the essence is unchanging and the nature is clarity, the basis pervades all. So then it moves into a prose section which explains this. The essence of pure pristine consciousness is endowed with the trio of essence, nature, and compassion. The transcendent state of all the Buddhas is the self-apparent pure kaya. Since there is neither grasping nor deviation, it enjoys the non-abiding dhatu and generates emanations. Oneself is the kaya of bindus departing in utter purity for the Vajra stage. The mandala of the array of the pristine consciousness of the pure bindu is the basis of migrating beings. There is no object of purification on the stage of the precious array of the path. It has gone beyond. The pristine consciousness of all secret mantras is arrayed in the dhatu that cannot be inferred through words and creates emanations. Since the self-apparent pristine consciousness without grasping is the core of all, it is exhibited in everyone. Though exhibited, it is not liberated. So where can there be liberation? The meaning of utter purity and Sugatagarbha is non-dual, the same. The pristine consciousness of the deeds of the Buddha is said to be the intention of secret mantra. The path of all secret mantras is said to be included in the essence of the pure lamp. Amazing. All that was said and not said is itself the difference between realization and non-realization. The all-creating king said that there is no past and no future in the state of Vidya. The transcendent state of the victors is entirely included in the dimension of the utterly pure Vajra mother. The self-liberated Vidya free from arising is said by the utterly pure king to be the Vajrakaya that is without arising or perishing. If there is no birth and death in the meaning that is without words and without syllables, there is nirvana in the unceasing dimension. The pristine consciousness of the Buddha is the body. Buddhahood is attained in the tip of the Vajra. The state of Vajrasattva itself is understood to possess the Vajra seal. The self-appearing Dharmata is said by all Buddhas to be the foremost of all. Since there is no purity or impurity in the state of utter purity, it is omniscient and knowing. The essence praised by all Buddhas is the Jnanakaya when it is free from abiding after one's true state is seen. The repeated mindfulness of that true state, through the repeated mindfulness of that true state, it dissolves into the stage of great bliss. And since there is neither distraction or non-distraction, the meaning arises in oneself and appears to oneself. The immaculate is explained at the time of seeing the truth of all phenomenon. Since there is neither good nor bad in the basis, perfect Buddhahood is uniformly non-dual. Do not explain the secret meaning of Buddhahood to Pratyeka Buddhas or those of inferior vehicles. Then the Buddha continues in verse and says, moreover, regarding the meaning of secret mantra, do not proclaim the secrets of secret mantra to the unintelligent, the small-minded, sycophants, those with deceitful minds, those attached to paths and stages, or those who lack the tantras. So I hope every one of you doesn't lack tantras, and that none of you are unintelligent, small-minded, etc. Yogins who have realized Dharmata see the appearance of light however it appears. The Vajra-like Buddha does not exist in a form that is one or many. For example, a powerful king causes fear because he conquers all. Likewise, the originally pure great perfection conquers the lower vehicles that are below Buddhahood. The deeds of Buddhahood cause fear in all. The perfect Buddhahood arises from the mind of great bliss. All Buddhas are the same and not relying on a basis or path. Utterly pure emanations are liberated in utter purity. Essence, nature, and compassion are complete in the basis. The 5 kayas and the 5 path pristine consciousnesses are complete in the path. The 3 kayas, the 5 pristine consciousnesses, and the appearance of light are complete in the result. Therefore, the trio of basis, path, and result are, in principle, inseparable. The result is the immovable Dharmakaya. The path is the pure 5 kayas. The basis is the unchanging great nature. Within the essence of the non-conceptual basis, Buddhas and sentient beings are non-dual, without birth, without death, without abiding, liberated in their own place. Since there is no grasping, the truth is seen. The essence of the unchanging path is intrinsically pure because there is no grasping. The essence of the diverse path is seen, the true nature of the path when not engaged in attachment and grasping. The nature of the basis and path match inclination. The Vidya that self-originated through its own power arose for the king of the self-originated method, the final goal of the basis, path, and result. The ultimate kaya of wisdom and the self-originated non-conceptual nature is the final goal of the basis, path, and result, said to be the view of the great pure clarity. So that gives you a sample of what you can find in the Rigpa-Rangshar Tantra. Now, when we turn our attention to the Rigpa-Rangdral, or the Self-Liberated Vidya Tantra, here there are a couple of things you should understand. Number one, the glossary and index for both volumes are in volume 2. I don't know how that's going to work out when there's an e-edition made. And in general, it made sense at the time for us to put the index in one volume. That means you can have, you know, the Rigpa-Rangshar open, but if you're looking for something specifically, then it makes it a little easier. However, we'll see how that works with the ebook. The second thing is that the introduction for the Self-Liberated Vidya Tantra is included in volume 1. It just made sense to include them together because similarly there's an analysis of the name of the text and a bit of an overview of the text. But in volume 2, since the Self-Liberated Vidya Tantra itself is rather short, it is in English, it's only 73 pages in English, unlike the Rigpa-Rangshar, which is, well, the number of pages of the Rigpa-Rangshar are, apart from the index, apart from the introduction, the introduction is 49 pages, and the total number of pages of the Tantra itself is 522 pages, so it's a rather lengthy book. As I said, it has 86 chapters. The additional material here in the Self-Liberated Vidya Tantra is a bit of an overview of the notion of the 3 series, is a survey of the 17 Tantras and contextualizing them with respect to different systems and different ways that the term the 3 series and 9 dimensions have been used in Dzogchen literature, as specifically this idea of the 3 series and 9 dimensions seems to originally arise in the Longde literature and the Vajra Bridge material. But the way this is treated in the Menakde literature is a bit different. And I address these differences in Appendix 1, as well as explaining the difference between the 3 series as it's presented in the Longde literature as opposed to the Menakde literature, and then discussing the so-called 4 cycles. So historically, Manjushri Mitra is considered to have divided the 6.4 million shlokas, and a shloka, in case you're curious, is a 32-syllable long sentence in Sanskrit. So that means that someone can do the math, but in general, Garab Dorje is said to have spoken 6.4 million shlokas. In some texts you see this is tantras, but the meaning is the same. Then Manjushri Mitra, according to the Menakde tradition, specifically the Vimanintig tradition, is held to have divided these 6.4 million shlokas of Dzogchen teachings into the 3 series, Semde, Longde, and Menakde. And then the Menakde section was held to have been divided up by Sri Singha into 4 cycles. The outer cycle, inner cycle, secret cycle, and the unsurpassed secret cycle. So in any case, this Appendix 1 discusses that, and then continues to discuss an outline of the 17 Tantras according to the String of Pearls, the Mutik Trengor String of Pearls Tantra, and Longchenpa's expansion of that material in his Dupta Zud, where he goes and describes, he uses that as the basis for his commentary and description. And then it concludes here with a brief survey of the 11 topics of the 17 Tantras, which is the content of Kepa Nibum's 11 topics text, Longchenpa's Sikten Zud, as well as other texts of Longchenpa's, and the Dreltik Chenmo, which comes from the Gongpa Zongtel, which is my previous book that we translated and edited, that was published by Wisdom, called Buddhahood in This Life, the Great Commentary. So in general, because the Rigpa Rangshar is extremely daunting, the way one can contextualize the information that you find within all of the 17 Tantras is by understanding any passage you're reading in one of the 17 Tantras within the context of the 11 topics. So, for example, if you're reading a section concerning the so-called lamps, the so-called 4 lamps, you can understand that the 4 lamps are really considered to be part of, in the 11 topics, discussions of channels and nadis and the basis, essence, nature, and compassion, things like the field, etc. All of these are considered to be part of the basis, whereas the topic of the path is very much concerned with empowerment, how to select a guru, and this sort of thing. So so when you're reading the material of the 17 Tantras, by using any of these 3 texts, I think Kepa Nibum's text has not been directly translated, but in any case, through referencing Buddhahood in This Life, or referencing Longchenpa's Sikten Zud, as translated by Sangye Khandro, she translates this as the treasury of genuine meaning. In any case, by referring your reading of the 17 Tantras, by referencing these 11 topics in the context of reading the 17 Tantras, then you can very easily understand whatever it is that you're reading in terms of whether it's related to the basis, the path, or the result. That's an important point that people should not ignore. Here, then, also, Longchenpa gives a sort of an overview of I don't mention here all of the different texts that Longchenpa lists as being ancillary literature for the 17 Tantras, but what I do here is I list the 10 texts or so which are ancillary literature which has survived to the present day that we are able to locate. Now, it's possible that in Tibet there's more of these ancillary texts. It's possible. We didn't know about the existence of these 6 commentaries that we have on the 17 Tantra, on individual 17 Tantras, until the late 90s, when Khenpo Munsel published his collection of works, where he had found these 6 commentaries on 6 of the 17 Tantras. So it's quite possible that in some library somewhere, more commentaries remain to be undiscovered. But as far as we know, only 10 or so of these texts have actually survived. There's 10, and then there's possibly the famous 3 words of Garab Dorje may in fact be a text which is associated with the Yige Mepa, which you can read here. So then finally, again, because the 11 topics is so important, I translated the section on the 11 topics directly from the commentary on the String of Pearls. So that constitutes the appendix of these 2 books. Now, in terms of the actual material of the Self-Liberated Vidya Tantra, it's divided into, I think I said it was 7 chapters. Let's see if I'm right. Maybe I'm right. Nope, I'm wrong. It's 10 chapters. Okay. Now, so 10 chapters including the entrustment and the Nidana chapter. This text, I have to be quite frank with you, is very hard to understand. The Nidana chapter itself continues. Some of it is fairly easy to understand. Some of it is very obscure. Unfortunately, we don't have commentaries for these 2 tantras, and so we're dependent very much on the footnotes and what little Longchenpa said about the topics of in the Self-Liberated Vidya in particular. For example, there are all these sort of syllables that Longchenpa explains something about how you're supposed to understand these syllables. In the Rigpa Ramchar, he explains a little bit about this sort of grammatical theory that we find in the Rigpa Rangdrol, but he doesn't say too much, and so therefore sometimes the what he's actually saying is a little difficult to understand. However, I've done my best, and even though it remains a little, sometimes it may seem a little unclear, I think that I think that we just try our best. Now, in terms of the most interesting topics here in this particular tantra, starting with chapter 3, which is called the summary topic, and continuing to chapter 5, called Freedom of the Characterized. These and also the entrustment chapter, the entrustment chapter. These 4 chapters really are the heart of the material which is contained within the Self-Liberated Vidya Tantra. So, for example, it has very nice statements, like, for example, there are, to give you an example, it says, there are the topic of the intimate instruction, the topic of the axioms, and the 3 things to bring to an end are known in all tantras. The three things to bring to an end are as follows: confusion, the knot of bewilderment; anger, the knot of appearance; and desire, the knot of the path. These 3 are known in all tantras as the 3 aspects. In order to remove those, the oral instruction is explained. Further, in order to remove mental doubts, 21 introductions shall be explained without error. So here, the 21 introductions are a reference to another tantra, which is called the Introduction Tantra, which explains 21 different introductions. And in Dzogchen teachings in general, in many different cycles of, in many different Terma cycles, they have shorter and longer texts of what these 21 introductions are, and sometimes they vary. Many of these introductions are concerned with how to recognize one's appearances in the bardo. So it's a very interesting, subject. So, for example, when it comes to how one should introduce students to the to Dzogchen teachings, it says, first, demonstrate the ultimate heart essence with the example mandala. After that, create confidence and confirm with the introduction of the signs. Next, perform the stages of practice with the introduction of the meaning. One should confirm the 3 kayas with the introduction to the mandala of the sun. Recognize the first introduction recognize the first bardo with the introduction of the moon and the water, recognize the Dharmadhatu with the introduction of the cloudless sky, etc. There's many useful things that this text states, but in a very brief way. So people who receive transmission of Dzogchen should be able to understand quite well what these brief aphorisms mean. And also, in this particular text, there's a chapter called Intimate Instructions, which I'll read a bit of because it's very nice. So here it's Manjushri Mitra asking the question. Once again, Manjushri Kumarabhuta made the following request. O greatly compassionate Bhagavan, the system of liberation of the Tantras being so, please teach the system of explaining the intimate instructions. Again, Mahavajradhara replied, O friends, we should understand that in this text, the Buddha here, whose proper name is Pao Zhono Tobden, who lives in this Deva realm, he's the last of the 6 teachers who teaches Devas, and he's one of the most important of the Buddhas who taught Dzogchen. But in this text, he's referred to, in both of these tantras, he's referred to as Bhagavan, Vajradhara, Vajrasattva, and so on and so forth. So when we see these terms, the Bhagavan, Mahavajradhara, Pao Zhono Tobden, Vajrasattva, etc., we shouldn't think that a different person is being addressed. We're always addressing this one particular Buddha in this one particular Buddha field, the blazing volcano charnel ground. That's where Pao Zhono Tobden lives. We have to understand, as the illustration shows, that Pao Zhono Tobden's appearance is like a Haruka. He has 3 heads, he has 6 arms, he has 4 legs, and so you know, he's really quite a fearsome character. So in any case, again, Mahavajradhara replied, O friends, listen properly to my teaching of the unerring meaning. Since there's no attainment to possess in the result, perfect, complete Buddhahood, there's nothing to be illuminated or obscured in pristine consciousness. There's no judgment to apply in the view. There are no gaps in the transcendent state. There is no apprehended object or apprehending subject in light. There is no matter in the kayas. There's no limitation in the dhatu. There's no grasping to a self in objects. There's nothing to see in the Buddha fields. That is the deed of a Samyak Sambuddha. Now, to demonstrate the enjoyment of Vidya, the topics of the clear intimate instructions will be distinguished. The essence is original purity. The nature is natural perfection. Compassion is a partial appearance. There is no limitation to the clusters in the Buddha fields. There are 5 visions, 2 sources, 6 essences of pristine consciousness, 3 locations of pristine consciousness, 1 measure of pristine consciousness, 4 paths of pristine consciousness, and 1 progression of pristine consciousnesses. With 3 transcendent phrases, there is no demarcation between samsara and nirvana. With 6 analytical words, wisdom is brought to the object. With 3 illustrative words, the mother and child pristine consciousness meet. The location of pristine consciousness is found with a single initial place of origin. The method of practice is explained with a single equipoise of vidya. The meaning can be contained within oneself with 3 realities of the kayas. The enjoyment of the example vidya's clear radiance of light is extensively explained with the objects of vidya. The recognition of the pristine consciousness of the path is explained. Again, Manjushri Kumarabhuta made the following request. O Lord of compassion, please teach the characteristics of the basis and the path. Once again came the reply, Sublime person, you must listen. I will teach this properly. Do not allow your mind to be distracted. The clear meaning of all that is as follows. The basis is beyond thought and beyond concept. The essence is beyond difference. The nature is beyond substantiality. Compassion is beyond action. The result is beyond being accomplished through effort. Pristine consciousness is beyond being and non-being. Conduct is associated with dharma. Samaya is associated with the view. Accomplishment is associated with the deity. Empowerment is associated with the intimate instructions. Realization is associated with the absence of duality. Meditation is associated with the absence of grasping. The view is associated with names. Names are associated with the essential meaning. The example is associated with rainbows. The sign is associated with the lamps. The dhatu is associated with the sky. Buddhas are associated with sentient beings. There are no phenomenon in the essence. There is no mind in a Buddha. The result ripens in sentient beings. There is nothing to accomplish in the Dharma. There's nothing to accomplish as a result. The transcendent state is seamless. There's no diminishment or setting aside in compassion. There's no being or non-being in the view. The place of origin. Now this is very interesting, and people really who are interested in understanding Dzogchen really need to understand these next passages very clearly. So next, the Buddha says here, the place of origin is outside the basis. Why? Because in the beginning, delusion is caused by conditions. And there's no conditions within the basis. So therefore, it says that delusion, there are appearances outside of a path. I mean, outside of the basis. There's an appearance outside of a path. Why? Because there's a need to practice. There is an appearance outside a result. Why? Because the result never reverts to the cause. So, in general, when we really read, if we are someone who has actually received introduction to Dzogchen teachings, and then we reflect upon these words are meant to be used as supports for our path as practitioners. They're not really something to turn into, they're not really doctrines to be used for negating other people and establishing our own position and so on and so forth. The purpose of Dzogchen teachings is so that we understand our own state, so that we understand something about our own condition. And so although there's a really excellent chapter in the Ritpa Ramchar about how to refute opponents of Dzogchen teachings. It's one of my favorite chapters. I don't mind telling you this. It has very interesting things in it, such as refutation of non-duality, which many people are surprised to learn that actually, although we use the language of non-duality, we use the term non-duality in Dzogchen teachings a lot. When we use the term non-duality, we're not setting up something as non-dual. We're not actually claiming that there is a non-dual state which should be reified substantially. We are really speaking epistemically. We're talking about from the point of view of our experience, we can have a non-dual experience. But the reason, for example, why Dzogchen teachings negate non-duality is summarized very, to summarize it very simply, the basis, because there's a possibility of not recognizing the basis and mistaking the nature of your own mind, literally is what we're talking about. Since there's a possibility that one doesn't recognize the appearances of one's consciousness as being one's own state, it's very possible to, and from that non-recognition, diversity proceeds. From not recognizing that one thing, then we have diversity. If that one thing were truly non-dual, there's no way that we could have any experience of diversity. And so for this reason, Dzogchen rejects non-duality as being an absolute state of being. In fact, we can have an experience of non-duality when we recognize the fluctuations of our own consciousness as being our own state. But that doesn't mean that state itself is ontologically non-dual either. Otherwise, delusion could never have arisen. And this is important because many people mistake the non-dual language of non-Buddhist systems, and they impute this language into particularly Dzogchen teachings. And so therefore they are very confused, and they don't understand how to properly distinguish Dzogchen teachings from non-Buddhist teachings such as Trikakajmer's Shaivism, Advaita Vedanta. And I'm not saying that these other systems are horrible. I'm just saying they're not Dzogchen, and they don't have the same view as Dzogchen. And people who claim that they have the same view of Dzogchen, quite frankly, don't understand the view of Dzogchen, actually. And I welcome any debate on the subject with anyone who cares to debate it with me. Therefore, having proclaimed the lion's roar of dualistic non-dualism in Dzogchen, or non-dual dualism, this is really the point of view of Dzogchen. I talk about this a little bit. Here, although we shouldn't use Dzogchen teachings as a basis for refuting opponents and stuff like that, it does come up that sometimes we need to say something. We need to sort of like correct people's point of view when they make mistaken assertions about Dzogchen. So that particular chapter on refuting opponents, I think it's chapter refuting all opponents, yes, chapter 69. So if people who are interested in polemics, they can read chapter 69 and they can have a really good time. But I warn you, it was not easy to translate, and it's not easy to understand. And I didn't, although I tried to make it as understandable as I could by putting down what the opponent's position is, what the reply is, and so on and so forth. Still, it really is a chapter which requires great attention to detail. One of the reasons why I think this chapter is particularly important is up till this point, the Bunpos have been the ones who are most renowned for having a tradition of debate, a tradition of Dzogchen debate. And while it's not really the case, there is a tradition of Dzogchen debate within the Buddhist Dzogchen tradition as well. For example, there's a text by Lotsun Namkai Jigme, which I've intended to translate for some time, but I haven't gotten around to it, which is basically concerned with proving the superiority of Dzogchen teachings. It's a very interesting text, and it goes very systematically. It proves why Dzogchen teachings are superior. So while the Bunpos, as I said, have a very very elaborate and well-established and highly respected tradition of Dzogchen debate, even His Holiness the Dalai Lama has complimented the Bunpos on their ability to debate these very abstruse concepts in a very interesting way. It's not the case that the Buddhist Dzogchen tradition is lacking this. I think perhaps the Bunpos developed this idea to perhaps a higher degree because they are a more beleaguered tradition within Tibetan Buddhism, because they have had a very hard time establishing their legitimacy in the face of doubt from Buddhist exponents. In any event, some papers and books have been published on this topic. But I think it's important to point out that also we in the Buddhist Dzogchen tradition, we also have these kinds of debates, and we also have this kind of language, and we also have this kind of recourse. And, you know, a great example of this, of course, is Longchenpa himself. Now, most people don't really focus very much on Longchenpa's polemical voice. But Longchenpa's polemical voice is important. And while, as I mentioned before, the purpose of these texts is not to use them in debate and sort of establish our own position and refute other people's position and so on and so forth, sometimes it's very necessary. And so that particular chapter is one of my favorite because it offers very clear guidance, not only in how we can eliminate misconceptions within our own tradition, but how we can eliminate the misconceptions of others who mistakenly impute their own tradition's point of view into Dzogchen teachings erroneously. That's a very important point, because these days, largely because of the use of the translation of the term Rigpa as awareness, there's a great deal of confusion about what the so-called neo-Advaita or non-dualist, sort of non-dual, sort of non-Buddhist tradition. They also talk an awful lot about awareness. It's not really clear where they get this terminology from. I suspect they originally borrowed it from earlier translations of Dzogchen material, actually. But nevertheless, the main point here is that their understanding is not the same as the understanding of Dzogchen. And we should really try very hard to make sure that this is differentiated so that people can actually properly practice the path of Dzogchen teachings, even though there's no path, by understanding the basis, even though there's no basis, so that they can experience the result of Dzogchen, which of course isn't a result. I don't really have that much more to add. I just want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you enjoy reading these books as, these two books. So here they are. There's the box. It's a nice box, blue, nice gold ah. So if you're, if you're a Dzogchen community person, you can just like stick this on your bookshelf facing out. Every time you walk past your bookshelf, you'll have like an automatic reminder of Guru Yoga. And then we have these two books here. Nice hardcover books, weighty. So I encourage you to, of course, I encourage you to secure these books. Hopefully you're someone who has transmission, because these books really shouldn't be read by people who don't have transmission. If you don't have transmission, then please get these books and put them on your shrine and hold off reading them until you've actually received Dzogchen transmission and have some experience. And I hope that you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed translating them. The whole process of bringing these two very important books was joyful, even though, of course, it was attended by the occasional disagreement and frustration and this kind of thing. But any great thing that you try and do is never always going to be perfect, because, well, we're normal sentient beings trying to bring transcendent stuff into the English language for you all to read. But I have to say that in general, the process of bringing this into English has been very joyful. And I also want to take this time to mention that Wisdom has agreed to accept our next manuscript, or perhaps two. We're not quite sure. We're still in negotiation. But they've agreed to publish the next of the series, which is the Negate and its commentary called the Blossoming Lotus. And that's very exciting, because it will be the first time that a major commentary on a Dzogchen Tantra has appeared in the English language in complete form. And we're hoping that they will also accept our translation of the commentary of the Blazing Lamp Tantra with the Blazing Lamp Tantra and publish that as the next box set. In any case, we can be sure that the Yige Mepa will be released in the spring of 2020, although we've encouraged them to release it sooner. I don't know if they will, but maybe if you pester them, you are reading public, they'll realize that people are hungry. And so therefore, I just wanted to make this announcement because it's a very exciting time for Zongtal editions. And we are very pleased to be able to bring these to you, and hope that it aids you in your path and understanding of the teaching of Dzogpa Chenpo, which from our point of view is the most amazing thing in this globe. So thank you very much, and that's all for today. And if anybody has any questions, you can answer them. You can ask them on the Zongtal page, or ask them of me directly on my own Facebook page. Okay, that's it. Oh, our tech person doesn't know what to do, so I'm going to turn this off.